"Sweetheart, I think you're a little lost. This section is for our premium members." The woman's voice, dripping with saccharine condescension, cut through the quiet hum of the exclusive airport lounge. She looked my 17-year-old daughter Chloe up and down her gaze, lingering on her faded band t-shirt and worn jeans as if they were a personal offense. Chloe was just trying to charge her phone, sitting quietly in a designated seat. But for this woman, Chloe's skin color was the only membership card she saw, and in her eyes, it was clearly invalid. She had no idea she wasn't just talking to a misplaced teenager. She was talking down to the daughter of a federal air marshal. And I was about to walk through those doors. The Aura First Class Lounge at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was designed to be an oasis of tranquility amidst the chaos of travel. It was a world of muted grays and deep blues, of polished chrome and hushed conversations. The air smelled faintly of expensive coffee, and a clean citrus-based fragrance pumped discreetly through the vents. The gentle clinking of porcelain cups and the soft rustle of newspapers were the only sounds that disturbed the peace. For 17-year-old Chloe Rossi, it felt less like an oasis and more like a museum she wasn't supposed to touch. She clutched her worn backpack, its straps frayed from years of carrying textbooks and sketchpads. She felt the eyes of other passengers on her as she walked past the gleaming marble bar, searching for an open seat with a power outlet. It wasn't overt staring, but a series of quick, dismissive glances. A man in a tailored suit lowered his Financial Times just enough to peer over the top. A woman with a diamond bracelet that could probably pay for a year of college tuition gave a slight, almost imperceptible sniff. Chloe was used to it. She was a biracial girl with a black mother and a late Italian-American father, and she had inherited her mother's beautiful dark skin and her father's curly, untamable hair, which she wore in a puff on top of her head. In places like this, her very existence seemed to be a question mark to some people. Her mother, Isabella, had insisted she use the lounge. "You have a 4-hour layover, sweetie," she'd said over the phone the night before. "Don't sit out there on those hard terminal benches. My membership pass gets a guest. The card is in the front pocket of your bag. Just scan it. Get some food, charge your phone, and relax. I'll meet you there as soon as my flight lands." Isabella Rossi was a woman who lived a life of perpetual motion, a ghost in the federal system, whose job description was intentionally vague to outsiders. To Chloe, she was just Mum, the one who made the best lasagna, quizzed her on chemistry homework via FaceTime from anonymous hotel rooms, and always showed up for the important things, even if it meant flying across 3 time zones. This trip was one of those important things. Chloe was flying from their home in Denver to spend a rare 2-week vacation with her mother, who was finishing a long assignment in Florida. Finally, Chloe spotted it, a plush, solitary armchair next to a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the tarmac, and right beside it, a small black-paneled charging station. Perfect. She slipped into the chair, pulled out her phone and a worn paperback, and tried to make herself as small as possible. She was acutely aware of the family that had claimed the semi-private alcove across from her. They were the picture of inherited wealth. The woman who looked to be in her late 40s had perfectly coiffed blonde hair that didn't move a millimeter when she turned her head. Her name, as Chloe would soon learn, was Caroline Sterling. She was dressed in crisp white linen, adorned with a simple but obviously expensive gold necklace. Her husband, Robert, was absorbed in his laptop, his face a mask of stern concentration. He had the kind of polished, authoritative look of a man who chaired board meetings and never flew commercial unless it was in a seat that turned into a bed. Their son, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, was a miniature version of his father, jabbing impatiently at an iPad, with the sound on a tinny series of explosions and laser blasts that grated on the lounge's serene atmosphere. His name was Preston. Chloe tried to ignore them, focusing on the planes taxiing outside. But she could feel Caroline's gaze. It was a heavy, critical thing. Caroline would whisper something to her husband, who would grunt in response without looking up. Then she'd glance back at Chloe, her lips pursed in a tight line of disapproval. The whispers grew slightly more audacious. Can't believe the standards these days. Letting just anyone in. Some kind of guest pass, I'm sure. It lowers the tone. Chloe's cheeks burned. She sank lower into her chair, pulling the hood of her sweatshirt over her head. She just needed to charge her phone to 50% so she could text her mum that she'd found a spot. Her own portable charger had died naturally. She plugged in the cord and watched the battery icon turn green, a small beacon of hope. The son, Preston, suddenly grew bored with his game. He stood up and began to wander his expensive sneakers, squeaking on the polished floor. He made his way over to the complimentary snack bar, grabbing fistfuls of cookies and dropping crumbs in his wake. As he passed Chloe's chair, he stumbled, sending a shower of shortbread crumbs onto her backpack. "Preston, darling, watch where you're going." Caroline called out, her voice sharp, but without any real heat. It was the tone of someone correcting a minor inconvenience, not a child's misbehavior. Preston just giggled and ran back to his mother. Chloe sighed and brushed the crumbs off her bag. It was then that Caroline decided to act. She stood up, her posture radiating an unshakable sense of authority, and walked over to Chloe. She didn't stand too close, maintaining a distance, as if Chloe were contagious. She looked at Chloe's phone plugged into the station, then at Chloe's attire, and a smug, pitying smile spread across her face. And then she said it. "Sweetheart, I think you're a little lost." Her voice was syrupy sweet, the kind of tone one uses for a toddler or a stray dog. This section is for our premium members. She gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings, as if to highlight how out of place Chloe was. "The public waiting areas are just down the concourse. I'm sure you'll be much more comfortable there." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Every whisper in the lounge seemed to cease. The man with the Financial Times was now openly staring. The woman with the diamond bracelet watched with undisguised interest. Chloe felt her throat tighten. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of humiliation and anger. She looked up at Caroline Sterling's perfectly made-up face, at the cold certainty in her blue eyes, and knew that this woman didn't see a person. She saw a problem that needed to be removed from her sightline. For a moment, Chloe was paralyzed. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the woman left her breathless. A dozen retorts flew through her mind, angry, sarcastic, wounded, but none of them could find their way past the lump of indignation lodged in her throat. She found her voice, though it came out quieter, shakier than she wanted. I'm supposed to be here." Chloe managed her gaze, dropping to the membership card peeking out of her backpack's front pocket. "My mum has a membership." Caroline let out a soft, condescending laugh. It was a sound that implied Chloe had just told a particularly silly and unbelievable fairy tale. "Oh, honey, that's sweet. But this is the Aura First Class Lounge. It's a very exclusive membership. Perhaps your mother has a pass for a different lounge. They can be so confusing." The "you people" was left unsaid, but it hung in the air as clear and sharp as the cut of Caroline's diamond earrings. "No," Chloe said, her voice gaining a sliver of firmness. She reached for her backpack to pull out the card to shove the proof in this woman's smug face. "It's for this one. My mum is—" "Carolyn, is there a problem here?" A man in a sharply pressed airline uniform approached. His name tag read Arthur, and beneath it lounge manager. He had a practiced plastic smile plastered on his face, but his eyes darted nervously between the impeccably dressed Caroline Sterling and the teenager in the hoodie. His professional calculus was happening in real time. Who was the path of least resistance? Arthur, thank goodness, Caroline said, turning on a wave of manufactured charm. It seems this young lady has wandered in by mistake. I was just gently explaining that this area is reserved for members. She placed a subtle emphasis on gently, painting herself as a benevolent guide. Arthur's gaze fell on Chloe. The plastic smile tightened. He didn't ask Chloe for her side of the story. He didn't ask if she had a pass. He looked at her jeans, her sweatshirt, her skin, and he made an assumption. "Mom," he said to Chloe, his tone shifting from servile to Carolyn to firm with intruder. "I'm going to have to see your credentials, your boarding pass and your lounge invitation, please." Chloe's hands trembled as she fumbled with her backpack zipper. The injustice of it all made her clumsy. She felt like a criminal being asked for papers. "I have it. It's right here." "Of course she says she has it," Caroline murmured to her husband, just loud enough for Chloe and Arthur to hear. They always do. Robert Sterling finally looked up from his laptop, his expression one of pure annoyance. "Caroline, for heaven's sake, just have him remove her. I'm trying to finalize the quarterly projections for our bid on Project Chimera. I don't have time for this drama." The name Project Chimera meant nothing to Chloe, but the dismissive way he spoke, as if she were a fly buzzing around his head, stung more than anything. Chloe finally pulled out the heavy black plastic card and her boarding pass and held them out to Arthur. He took them, his brow furrowed in skepticism. He examined the membership card, turning it over and over. It was a top-tier unlimited access card, the kind issued to the airline's most valued global flyers or high-level corporate partners. Arthur's expression shifted from skepticism to confusion. The name on the card read Isabella Rossi. The name on the boarding pass read Chloe Rossi. The card was valid. The guest access was valid. He was caught. "Well," Arthur stammered, clearing his throat, "it seems the card is valid." Caroline's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. "Valid, are you sure? It's probably stolen." "Mom!" Chloe gasped, horrified. The accusation so casually thrown was like a slap in the face. "It's a reasonable assumption," Caroline said, crossing her arms. She looked Chloe up and down again. "Someone like you with a card like that, it's highly irregular. I'm sure if you check, you'll find the real owner has reported it missing." Arthur was sweating now. He was trapped between a high-value complaining guest and the airline's own rules. Appeasing Caroline seemed the safer bet. "Mrs. Sterling does have a point," he said, turning back to Chloe. His voice was low conspiratorial. "It is a very high-level card. For security purposes, I need to verify your identity and your relationship to the cardholder. Do you have photo ID?" "Yes, my school ID," Chloe said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. She was being interrogated, humiliated in front of a room full of strangers, all because this woman didn't like the look of her. She handed over her student ID. Arthur compared the photo to her face, then to the names. "And how do you know Isabella Rossi?" "She's my mother," Chloe said through gritted teeth. Caroline let out another disbelieving scoff. "Your mother, really? And what does your mother do to afford a membership like this?" The sneer in her voice was venomous. She was no longer hiding her contempt. Before Chloe could answer, Caroline stepped forward. "I think we should see what else is in that bag. If she stole the card, who knows what else she's lifted." "That's enough," Chloe said, her voice finally cracking with emotion. "You can't just search my things. It's a matter of lounge security," Arthur said, his voice taking on a false tone of authority. He was fully on Caroline's side now. He reached for Chloe's backpack. "If you have nothing to hide, you won't mind." "I do mind," Chloe cried, pulling her backpack away. Her sudden movement caused her phone, still connected to the charger, to be yanked from the port. It clattered to the floor, the screen protector cracking. "Now look what you've done," Arthur said, his voice cold. "You're creating a disturbance." Robert Sterling stood up. "That's it. Arthur, call airport security. Have her removed. Now." "Yes, Mr. Sterling," Arthur said, pulling out his radio. Tears of frustration and helplessness welled in Chloe's eyes. She was trapped. She was being accused of theft, her property was being threatened, and security was being called to escort her out like a common criminal. She felt utterly alone. She looked toward the frosted glass doors of the lounge entrance, a desperate, silent prayer on her lips. "Mum, please get here. Please." As Arthur spoke into his radio, requesting airport police to the Aura Lounge to handle a disruptive and potentially fraudulent guest, a figure pushed through the frosted glass doors. It wasn't the uniformed officers Chloe was dreading, but a woman. She was of average height, with a poised athletic build that a sharply tailored navy blue blazer did little to conceal. Her hair was pulled back into a severe professional bun, and her face devoid of makeup was all sharp angles and intelligent, watchful eyes. She moved with an economy of motion, a quiet confidence that was the polar opposite of Caroline Sterling's loud theatrical entitlement. She scanned the room, her gaze sweeping over the scene, Arthur with his radio, Robert Sterling standing imperiously, Caroline looking triumphant, and a distraught Chloe clutching her backpack. Her eyes, the same warm, dark eyes as Chloe's, narrowed almost imperceptibly. This was Isabella Rossi. She didn't rush over. She didn't shout. She simply walked forward her footsteps, silent on the plush carpet, and stopped a few feet from the tableau. Her presence was a stone dropped into a still pond, creating ripples of curiosity. Arthur, finishing his call, turned and saw her. "Can I help you, Mom?" he asked, his customer service smile automatically snapping back into place. "I'm meeting my daughter," Isabella said, her voice calm, and even yet carrying a resonance that made Arthur pay attention. She looked directly at Chloe. "It appears I'm just in time." Chloe's face crumpled in relief. "Mom!" She whispered the word thick with unshed tears. Caroline Sterling's eyes widened in theatrical disbelief. She looked from Isabella's severe professional demeanor to Chloe's youthful, distressed face. The idea that this powerful-looking woman was the mother of the girl in the hoodie seemed to her preposterous. "You're her mother?" Caroline asked, her voice laced with the same acidic skepticism she'd used before. She gestured from Isabella's blazer to Chloe's band t-shirt. The story just gets more and more creative. Isabella turned her head, slowly fixing her gaze on Caroline. It was not an angry look. It was something far more unnerving, analytical. It was the look of a predator, sizing up its prey, noting every detail, every weakness. "There's a story?" Isabella asked, her voice dangerously soft. "Please tell me. I seem to have walked in during the middle of it." Arthur, sensing a shift in the power dynamic, but not yet understanding it, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Arthur, the lounge manager. We've had a small security incident. This young lady was in possession of a premium membership card." He held up the black card. "That we have reason to believe may be stolen." "You have reason to believe my property is stolen?" Isabella asked, her eyes still locked on Caroline. She hadn't even glanced at Arthur. "This guest," Arthur said, indicating Caroline, raised a legitimate concern. "The young lady's appearance doesn't quite match the profile of our typical members," and she became agitated when we questioned her. Agitated? Isabella's gaze finally shifted to Arthur. It felt like a physical weight. My daughter, who was sitting quietly in a designated chair, was accused of theft by another passenger, and when you, the manager, were called, you chose to interrogate her and threaten to search her private property. And you're surprised she became agitated. Arthur's plastic smile began to melt. Well, when you put it that way, I was simply following protocol for a potential security issue. Whose protocol, Arthur? Isabella asked, taking a step closer. The airline's or Mrs. Sterling's? Robert Sterling, who had remained silent, decided it was time to assert his dominance. Listen, whoever you are. Your daughter was in a restricted area. She couldn't verify her identity properly, and she was causing a scene. We are frequent flyers with this airline holding top-tier status for over a decade. Our concerns are not to be dismissed. He puffed out his chest slightly. My company, Sterling Aeronautics, has a multi-million-dollar corporate account here. Now Arthur is calling airport police to have your daughter removed, and I suggest you go with her before you're charged with trespassing as well. Isabella listened to his entire speech without blinking. When he was finished, a long, heavy silence stretched out. She looked at Robert, then at Caroline, then at the trembling Arthur. She took a slow, deliberate breath. First, she said, her voice dropping to a low, chillingly precise register. You will tell your man to put his radio away. You are not calling the airport police. In fact, you're not calling anyone. Arthur looked at Mr. Sterling, who gave a sharp nod. I will do no such thing. She is being removed. Second, Isabella continued, ignoring them both and speaking directly to Arthur. You will retrieve my daughter's phone, which is on the floor, and you will apologize to her for the humiliation you've caused. Caroline laughed out loud. You must be delusional. Apologize to her. Arthur, get them out of here. Isabella slowly reached into the inner pocket of her blazer. It was not a sudden movement, but a smooth, practiced motion. Everyone tensed. Robert Sterling subconsciously took a half step back. Was she reaching for a phone? A weapon? I'm going to say this one last time. Isabella said, her eyes now devoid of any warmth. Cancel the call. Apologize to my daughter. Because in about 5 seconds, the situation here is going to escalate in a way you are not prepared for. And the people who will be arriving will not be airport police. They will be my colleagues. She held her hand inside her blazer, her fingers curled around something small and rectangular. The entire lounge was now watching the silence absolute. And who exactly are your colleagues? Robert Sterling scoffed, trying to regain control. A team of lawyers. We have more lawyers than God. Isabella's lips curved into a smile that held no humor at all. It was a terrifying sight. No, Mr. Sterling, she said softly. Not lawyers. She pulled her hand from her blazer. Isabella didn't brandish the object in her hand. She simply held it cradled in her palm. It was a black leather wallet, simple and unadorned. For a heartbeat, Caroline Sterling looked smug, as if she expected Isabella to offer a bribe. Robert Sterling rolled his eyes, a clear expression of, get on with it. Arthur just looked confused. Then, with a flick of her thumb, Isabella opened the wallet. It didn't flip open to cash or credit cards. It flipped open to a single recessed credential under a protective laminate. Gold and blue with a striking eagle seal. The words, printed in stark official font, were unmistakable even from a few feet away. United States Air Marshal Service. Federal Law Enforcement Officer. Below it, her photograph and name, Isabella Rossi. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Silence. A profound, echoing silence that consumed the entire lounge. The clinking of glasses stopped. The rustling of papers ceased. The man with the Financial Times slowly lowered his paper, his mouth slightly agape. The color drained from Arthur's face. He looked as if he'd been punched in the gut, all the air forced from his lungs. His hand, still holding the radio, began to tremble violently. He stared at the credentials, then at Isabella's face, then back at the credentials, his brain struggling to reconcile the two realities. Robert Sterling's arrogant posture deflated like a punctured balloon. His jaw went slack. He was a man who understood power, who navigated the corridors of corporate and government influence. He knew exactly what he was looking at. This wasn't a complaint to customer service. This was an incident with a federal agent. The name he had mentioned earlier, Project Chimera, flashed in his mind, followed by a wave of pure, cold dread. But the most dramatic reaction came from Caroline Sterling. Her smug, triumphant expression dissolved into a mask of horrified disbelief. Her perfectly painted lips parted, but no sound came out. Her mind, so quick to judge and categorize, simply could not process this information. The girl in the hoodie, the thief, the nuisance she had so confidently tried to expel, was the daughter of this, of a federal agent with authority that dwarfed her own perceived status into insignificance. As I was saying, Isabella said, her voice now carrying the full, unassailable weight of her office, you were about to cause a disturbance at a federal security checkpoint, which an airport is, and interfere with a federal officer. A very, very poor choice. She snapped the wallet shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. She turned her full attention to Arthur. You, manager. What is your full name? Arthur Pembroke. He stammered, his eyes wide with panic. Well, Arthur Pembroke. Isabella said, her tone as sharp and cold as ice. You have in the last 10 minutes allowed a civilian to direct your actions. You have profiled and harassed a minor. You have baselessly accused her of theft, and you have attempted to unlawfully search her belongings, all while she was a validly credentialed guest in your establishment. You then escalated the situation by attempting to involve local law enforcement for a non-existent crime. How in any version of your employee handbook does that sound like correct procedure? Arthur couldn't speak. A faint squeaking sound escaped his lips. Isabella then turned to the Sterlings. And you, she said, her voice dropping lower. Mrs. Sterling, your behavior is not just rude, it's a liability. You initiated this entire confrontation based on prejudice. You made false accusations of a crime. That's slander. She then locked eyes with Robert Sterling, and he visibly flinched. Mr. Sterling, of Sterling Aeronautics. She said the name of his company slowly, deliberately letting it hang in the air. You endorsed your wife's behavior and then used your corporate influence to try and intimidate an airline employee into removing my daughter. Worse, you tried to intimidate me. Robert finally found his voice, though it was thin and reedy, a pale imitation of his earlier booming confidence. This is a misunderstanding. My wife was overzealous. We apologize. We deeply apologize. Oh, you will, Isabella assured him, but not to me. She looked at her daughter Chloe, who was standing amidst the wreckage of the confrontation, her tears forgotten, replaced by a look of sheer awe. Chloe, are you all right? Chloe nodded, speechless. Isabella knelt and picked up Chloe's phone from the floor, examining the cracked screen protector. She stood up and held it out. Not to Chloe, but to Arthur Pembroke. Your apology, she commanded, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. Arthur stumbled forward, his entire body shaking. He took the phone as if it were a venomous snake. He turned to Chloe, his face a pathetic mix of fear and regret. Miss Rossi, he choked out. I am so sorry. There's no excuse. I was wrong. I apologize. For everything. Isabella's gaze shifted to Caroline. Your turn. Caroline Sterling stood, frozen, her face pale. The world she knew, a world that bent to her will, had shattered. She was being commanded to apologize to the very person she had deemed less than human just moments before. Her pride warred with her terror, and terror won. I am sorry," she whispered the words, sounding like glass grinding in her throat. She couldn't bring herself to look at Chloe. "Look at her when you say it," Isabella ordered. Caroline's head snapped up her eyes, meeting Chloe's. For the first time, she saw not a stereotype, but a person, a young girl she had needlessly and cruelly tormented. "I'm sorry," she repeated, her voice cracking. Isabella wasn't finished. She turned back to Robert Sterling. "Sterling Aeronautics," she said again thoughtfully. "You mentioned a Project Chimera. Is that a Department of Defense contract bid?" The blood drained completely from Robert's face. He knew in that instant that this was no longer about a lounge squabble. This was about his entire future. The fallout was not loud and explosive, but quiet and devastatingly efficient. Isabella never raised her voice again. She didn't need to. The authority she wielded was now a palpable force in the room. "Arthur Pembroke," she said calmly, "you will call your corporate head of security. Not airport police, your security. You will inform them that there has been an incident at this location involving a federal law enforcement officer, and that my daughter and I will require a private room to make a formal statement." Arthur fumbled with his radio, his hands shaking so badly he could barely press the right buttons. "Yes, ma'am. Right away, ma'am." Isabella then looked at the Sterlings. "You three will not be leaving. You will wait here until airline security arrives. You are material witnesses to this incident. Attempting to leave could be construed as fleeing the scene." Robert Sterling nodded numbly, ushering his wife and now silent son back to their alcove. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sick, dawning horror. Caroline sank into a chair, her face ashen. She stared blankly at the polished floor, the world she had so carefully constructed, now tilting on its axis. Preston, for the first time, seemed to understand that something was terribly wrong and sat quietly, his iPad forgotten. Within 10 minutes, 2 stern-faced individuals in dark suits arrived. They were not mall cops. They were the airline's senior corporate security team, ex-law enforcement, by the look of them. They conferred quietly with Isabella, who showed them her credentials. Their deference was immediate and total. Arthur Pembroke was quietly escorted away, not in handcuffs, but with a finality that suggested his career with the airline had ended the moment Isabella revealed her badge. Chloe and Isabella were shown to a small private office behind the lounge's reception area. A senior security official, a man named Henderson, took their statements personally, his pen scratching furiously on a notepad. "Agent Rossi," Henderson said, his tone deeply respectful. "On behalf of the airline, I want to offer our most profound apologies. This level of service failure is unacceptable under any circumstances, but given the situation, it's catastrophic. Mr. Pembroke has been suspended pending a full investigation, which I assure you will result in his termination. We will of course be replacing your daughter's phone and offering you both compensation for the distress caused." Isabella held up a hand. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I appreciate the swift action. However, the phone is a minor issue. My primary concern is the systemic failure that allowed this to happen. Your manager chose to believe a biased complaint over the evidence of a valid pass in his hand. That's a training issue, a culture issue." "Understood, Agent. We will be reviewing all lounge management protocols nationwide." Isabella nodded. "Good." Then she paused. "Mr. Henderson, I need you to do something for me. I need you to find out everything you can about Sterling Aeronautics' corporate account with your airline. specifically any ties to Government Travel Department of Defense, contracts, anything of that nature. Henderson looked surprised, but nodded without question. Of course. I can access that information directly. He typed for a moment on his tablet. His eyebrows shot up. Well, this is interesting, he said. Sterling Aeronautics is not just a corporate partner. They are a major government contractor. They specialize in secure avionics and guidance systems. According to this, they're currently in the final stages of a security review for a renewal of a very sensitive DoD contract, codenamed Project Chimera. Chloe looked at her mother. Isabella's face was unreadable, but a flicker of grim satisfaction showed in her eyes. The pieces were clicking into place. And who would be the primary point of contact for that security review? Isabella asked. The Department of Homeland Security, Henderson said, reading from the screen. All of their key personnel require extensive background checks and security clearances, which are managed through DHS. Isabella's own agency, the Federal Air Marshal Service, operated under the Transportation Security Administration, which in turn was part of the Department of Homeland Security. It was all connected. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. That's very helpful, Isabella said. Please have Mr. and Mrs. Sterling's full names and contact information included in your report. I will be making a separate report through my own channels. The implication was clear and chilling. This was no longer an airline customer service issue. It was now a matter for the Department of Homeland Security, a government contractor whose business relied entirely on maintaining the highest level of security and trustworthiness, had one of its top executives involved in an incident at an airport where he and his wife profiled, harassed, and slandered the daughter of a DHS federal agent. When Isabella and Chloe finally left the office, the Sterlings were being spoken to by Henderson in low, serious tones. Robert Sterling looked physically ill. He caught Isabella's eye across the room, his expression one of desperate pleading. Isabella met his gaze for a single cold second before turning away and guiding Chloe out of the lounge. As they walked down the concourse toward their new departure gate, to which they had been personally escorted and upgraded to international first class, Chloe was quiet. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Isabella asked, putting a protective arm around her shoulder. "I think so," Chloe said, her voice small. "Mum, what's going to happen to them?" Isabella sighed. "Actions have consequences, Chloe. That's all. Mrs. Sterling chose to act on prejudice. Mr. Sterling chose to use his power to bully people. They just happened to pick a very, very wrong day to do it." She looked down at her daughter. "The world is full of people like them. People who will judge you before they know you. The only thing you can control is how you carry yourself. You did nothing wrong. You were strong and you stood your ground. I'm so proud of you." Chloe finally let a small smile touch her lips. "I wasn't that strong. I was about to cry." "Strength isn't about not being scared or upset," Isabella said softly. "It's about enduring it. And you did." They arrived at their gate. As they waited to board, Isabella's work phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, a brief, encrypted message from a colleague she had contacted in DHS security oversight. She read it, and her expression became grim. "What is it?" Chloe asked. "It seems," Isabella said, deleting the message, "that Sterling Aeronautics has had 2 prior flags for lax personnel security protocols. Their big contract renewal was already on shaky ground. An executive involved in a security incident demonstrating profoundly poor judgment and prejudicial behavior at a major airport, that's not just a red flag. It's a nail in the coffin. Robert Sterling hadn't just allowed his wife to create a scene. He had, through his arrogance and complicity, single-handedly jeopardized the future of his entire company. The unraveling had just begun. 2 weeks later, Chloe and Isabella were sitting on the balcony of a small beachfront condo in Florida, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The vacation had been exactly what Chloe needed. The memory of the Aura Lounge had begun to fade, replaced by the sound of waves and the warmth of the sun. The airline had replaced her phone and sent a check for $5,000 for emotional distress, which Chloe had immediately decided to put toward her college fund. It felt like a closed chapter. Then Isabella slid a tablet across the patio table. On the screen was an article from a major financial news website. The headline was stark. Sterling Aeronautics stock plummets. 30% as CEO, Robert Sterling resigns. Key DoD contract renewal denied. Chloe read the article, her eyes widening. It was all there sanitized for public consumption. The official reason for the contract denial was a failure to meet enhanced security protocols. It mentioned recent events that called into question the judgment of key executive personnel. Robert Sterling's resignation was effective immediately, citing personal reasons. The article detailed how the loss of Project Chimera, a multi-billion-dollar program, was a catastrophic blow from which the mid-sized defense firm might never recover. Thousands of jobs were now at risk, an entire company brought to its knees. "Wow," Chloe whispered, looking up at her mother. "It really happened." "It really happened," Isabella confirmed, sipping her iced tea. "I got a follow-up report. The DHS Review Board made their final decision last week. The incident at Hartsfield-Jackson was cited specifically in their findings. They called it a demonstration of volatile and biased judgment incompatible with the handling of sensitive national security information. Robert's attempt to use his corporate weight to influence the situation, combined with his wife's instigation, was seen as a complete failure of character." "And her?" Chloe asked. "Caroline," Isabella gave a wry smile. "From what I gather, their world has imploded. They're selling their mansion. Robert's severance package was likely gutted due to the for-cause nature of the contract loss. Her social circle, which was built entirely on her husband's success and power, has evaporated. When you build your house on a foundation of money and status, you can't be surprised when it collapses once the money and status are gone." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the waves. It wasn't a celebratory silence. It was somber. Chloe didn't feel happy about the Sterling's downfall. She didn't feel vindictive. She just felt a strange sense of finality, of balance. "It's not about revenge, Chloe," Isabella said, as if reading her daughter's mind. "Never make it about that. It's about accountability. Mrs. Sterling thought her privilege was a shield that made her untouchable. Mr. Sterling thought his power was a sword he could wield against anyone he chose. They both learned that there are quiet, unassuming people in this world who carry a different kind of authority, an authority that is earned, not bought, and must be respected." Chloe thought back to the moment in the lounge, the feeling of helplessness, of being judged and condemned based on nothing. She remembered the coldness in Caroline's eyes and the dismissive arrogance of her husband. They hadn't seen a person. They'd seen something to be swept away. "What about Arthur Pembroke?" Chloe asked. "The manager." "Fired as promised," Isabella said. "And the airline has implemented a new mandatory de-escalation and implicit bias training program for all its premium lounge staff worldwide. They're calling it the Rossi Protocol." Chloe blinked. "They named it after us," Isabella chuckled. "In a memo, yes. Sometimes a single stone can start an avalanche. Your quiet dignity under pressure, Chloe, was the stone. I just happened to be the mountain behind you." Chloe looked out at the vastness of the ocean. She understood now. Her mother's job wasn't just about being on planes. It was about upholding a standard, about being a quiet guardian in a world that was often loud and unjust. And today, Chloe felt like she had inherited a small piece of that strength. The world was still full of Carolines and Roberts, but it was also full of Isabellas, and Chloe knew which side she stood on. The reckoning hadn't been an act of karma. It had been a simple, brutal lesson in cause and effect. A lesson the Sterlings and anyone who thought like them would not soon forget. A year can change everything. It had changed Chloe, the timid 17-year-old who felt like an intruder in a world of privilege, was gone, replaced by a more self-assured young woman of 18. The incident in the Aura Lounge had paradoxically been a crucible. It had forged in her a quiet confidence, a certainty of her own worth that no sideways glance or whispered comment could ever again diminish. Her mother's words, "Strength isn't about not being scared. It's about enduring it," had become a personal mantra. She was in Boston now, touring college campuses. The city's history-soaked air and intellectual vibrancy thrilled her. After a long day of information sessions and walking tours at Boston University, she sought refuge in a cozy, brick-walled cafe tucked away on a cobblestone side street in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. The place smelled of old books and freshly ground espresso. It was a world away from the sterile opulence of an airport lounge. Chloe ordered a chai latte and found a small table by a window, pulling out a sketchbook. She was sketching the intricate pattern of the gas lamp across the street when the cafe door chimed. A woman entered carrying a large insulated catering box bearing the logo of an upscale deli, the Gilded Spoon. The woman looked tired, her shoulders slumped with a weariness that seemed bone deep. She was dressed in the company's simple uniform, black pants, a white polo shirt, and a black apron. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple functional ponytail, with stray wisps escaping around her face. She looked like any other working person at the end of a long day. But as she turned to set the box on the counter, the afternoon light caught her profile, and a jolt went through Chloe, cold and sharp as an electric shock. It was Caroline Sterling. The change was staggering. Gone was the perfectly coiffed helmet of hair, the impeccable white linen, the aura of untouchable superiority. The diamonds and gold were replaced by a cheap digital watch. The skin that had been smooth and pampered now looked strained, with fine lines of worry etched around her eyes and mouth. She looked diminished, human. For a moment, Chloe's instinct was to hide, to shrink back into herself, as she had done in the lounge. But that was the old Chloe. The new Chloe held her ground, her heart hammering, not with fear, but with a dizzying mix of shock and morbid curiosity. Caroline didn't notice her. She spoke to the barista in a low, tired voice, confirming the delivery details. As she turned to leave, her gaze swept across the cafe, a vacant automatic scan. Her eyes passed over Chloe, then snapped back, widening in stunned recognition. The color, already faint, drained from Caroline's face. Her lips parted, and her hand flew to her chest as if to steady a suddenly erratic heart. She looked cornered, a fox caught in the headlights. She took an involuntary step backward, turning toward the door, her only thought clearly to flee. "Wait," Chloe said. Her own voice surprised her. It was calm and steady. Caroline froze her back to Chloe. Her shoulders were tense, braced for an attack, an accusation, a triumphant gloat. Chloe stood up and walked toward her. She stopped a few feet away, creating no threat. "I just wanted to ask if you were okay." The question, so simple and devoid of malice, seemed to unhinge Caroline. She turned around slowly, her face a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, shame, fury, humiliation, and a deep, bottomless well of despair. "Okay." She spat her voice a harsh whisper. "Are you okay? You and your mother. You ruined me. You destroyed my life. Are you here to gloat, to see how far the mighty have fallen?" Her eyes blazed with a familiar fire, but it was a desperate, flickering flame, now not the confident inferno of before. "No," Chloe said softly. "I'm not here to gloat." "Then what do you want?" Caroline cried, her voice cracking, drawing the attention of the barista. "Do you want an apology? I gave you one. I stood there, and I apologized while your mother held my family's entire future in her hand. What more could you possibly want from me?" "I don't want anything from you," Chloe replied, keeping her voice even. "I was just surprised to see you. That's all." Her calmness seemed to break something in Caroline. The anger dissolved, leaving behind a raw, brittle grief. Her face crumpled. "He left me," she whispered, the words tumbling out as if a dam had broken. "Robert. He blamed me for everything. He said my public theatrics were the final straw for the board for the DHS. He said I handed them the excuse they needed to pull the contract." She laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "We lost the house, the cars, the club memberships, my friends. Funny how they stop answering your calls when you can no longer host charity galas. I haven't spoken to my son in 6 months. Robert won full custody. His lawyers argued that I was an unstable influence." She gestured to her uniform with a shaking hand. "This is my life now. I deliver overpriced sandwiches to people who used to be my peers. I'm invisible to them." Chloe listened, a profound sadness settling over her. This wasn't justice. It was just wreckage. "I didn't know," Chloe said quietly. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Sorry?" Caroline looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. "Why would you be sorry?" And in that moment, Chloe knew what she had to say. "Because none of it had to happen. My mother didn't ruin your life. Robert didn't ruin your life. I didn't ruin your life." She took a breath, letting the simple, terrible truth settle between them. "What you believed about me in that lounge, what you believe about people who look like me, that's what ruined your life. You just never had to face the bill for it before." The words struck Caroline with the force of a physical blow. She staggered back a step, leaning against an empty table for support. The fight went out of her, replaced by a ghastly, dawning comprehension. She was seeing the whole chain of events, not as a victim, but as the architect of her own demise. "It started," she murmured, her gaze distant, fixed on a past she couldn't escape. "Because I couldn't stand the sight of a black girl sitting in a nice chair. My God." She finally understood. It wasn't about a stolen card or a security disturbance. It was about her own ugliness, an ugliness she had nurtured for years, believing it was a mark of superiority. That single rotten belief had been the first domino, and it had toppled everything she held dear. Tears streamed down her face, now silent. Tears of profound, life-altering regret. Chloe felt a pang of pity, but she knew there was nothing more to say. An apology from her would be meaningless, and forgiveness wasn't hers to give. The reckoning was between Caroline and her own soul. Without another word, Chloe turned and walked back to her table. She gathered her sketchbook, left a $10 bill for her untouched latte, and walked out of the cafe, leaving Caroline Sterling alone with the echoes of her shattered world. As she stepped back onto the bustling cobblestone street, Chloe took a deep breath of the crisp Boston air. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a heavy clarity. She pulled out her phone and called her mother. "Hey, sweetie, how was the tour?" Isabella's voice was warm and familiar. "It was great," Chloe said. But Mum, you're not going to believe who I just saw. And that's the story of how a woman's ugly prejudice led to the complete destruction of her privileged life and her husband's multi-million-dollar company. It's a powerful reminder that the world is smaller than you think, and you never truly know who you're talking to. The person you decide to look down on might just be connected to a power structure you can't even fathom. The consequences for Carolyn and Robert Sterling weren't magical or mystical. They were the direct result of their own actions, colliding with a reality they chose to ignore. Their entitlement wrote a check that their status simply couldn't cash. What do you think? Was this a fitting outcome for their behavior? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of entitlement getting its much-needed reality check, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good story of justice, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life drama. Thanks for watching.